It should. There you go. We're live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Outside In, a place where we talk to thought workers have been looking outside ThoughtWorks about what's happening there, and hopefully there are some of the things that they have been talking about and hearing about outside ThoughtWorks will apply to us in ThoughtWorks as well. If not anything, it'll just pique our interest to read more, learn more. So today we are talking to Sameer and to Sumeet. Both of them have attended some conferences in the recent past and were telling me about some interesting takeaways that they had from there. So ready to get started, Sameer, Sumeet?
Yep, we are ready to get started.
All right, so we'll start with you, Sameer. You had been at Innovista, an innovation challenge. You were saying you heard some very interesting innovation stories there in different fields. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I heard a bunch of innovation stories. Maybe let me give one or two examples. And so this was a Tata Group's Innovista is a competition run inside Tata Group. So all the stories are from Tata companies. So first one, so this is about Tata Power distribution company in Delhi specifically. And what they did was they had a problem of just like any large cities, Tata Group provides power to most of Delhi, and the consumers consist of multiple demographic backgrounds. Some of the slums, which are the largest slums in Delhi, are under Tata Power distribution, and they have been having constant struggle to really recover pending bills. And some people in the slums were not paying bills. Some people were genuinely not receiving bills because not every hutment or every hut inside a slum has a proper address that a postman can reach out to and in a timely manner deliver the. And then, of course, just like in every city in India, I think they were facing enormous challenges of power theft. People just putting hooks onto the distribution lines and then taking power directly from those distribution lines. It was very risky, and they have already had few instances. Common problem in all the cities. What Tata Power distribution company in Delhi did was quite innovative. They actually created a network of women from these slum areas. They call them abhads, and they actually recruited these women. They said, why don't you help us streamline the whole operation? And these abhads came on board, and this was almost like they initially thought they were doing it as part of their CSR initiative, but eventually these abhas were able to help them not only reduce the theft and the risk of any malfunction or any accidents that are happening because of the mechanism of theft, but also went to the level where people in slums started paying the bills back. So the Tata Power company, they spent enough time working with these abhads, helping them understand the whole bill, how it is generated, what are the various components of it, how to measure the bill, kind of help people understand which components or which instruments in their home are responsible for higher bills. And eventually some 67 crore rupees were recovered, and I believe this was over a period of 12 or 13 months. And this is a project now they are thinking of actually going ahead and expanding the reach and doing it in all the slum areas of Delhi. So very interesting story that had a positive ROI impact, as well as very useful for the subsection of their consumers.
So these women got employed in some fashion, and
correct.
And their job was to demystify the bills and to report big thefts and so on. Is that, am I getting it right?
Correct, absolutely. And their job was also to, of course, act as a distribution channel, which means collect the bills from Tata Power Company, go to the every hut and kind of distribute those bills. So Tata Power was ensured that the bills are reaching the right consumers on the right day, and they also acted as a collection center. So if somebody wants to just give whatever 100 rupees or whatever that bill amount was, they could just hand it over back to the Abha. And Abha would pay it on their behalf.
Cool,
so pretty innovative way. One of the things that they were talking, and then I will take a pause, they were actually now in the process of figuring out how they can reach out to all the distribution companies across India, because this is not only a challenge uniquely faced by power distribution companies in Delhi, but it's same across all the metro cities, and not just power, but by all the utility companies. So they are actually figuring out whether they can convert it into a network that can be leveraged and useful both ways for the companies as well as for the society.
So the innovation here was that they tapped into the social network of the population that they were serving, right? I mean, these women knew their neighbors and neighbors and
correct, absolutely. So instead of using so they were saying before they had this idea, there were traditional ways of these slum people, they don't pay bills on time, and that was a traditional way of looking at it. And they were saying that, hey, our efforts of really assuming that they really don't want to pay the bills because of poverty, they don't have money, etc., whatever are the belief systems, and they were eventually ending up taking more of a stick approach towards ensuring how to recover money, and only to realize that every month they were actually, their losses were bigger than the previous month. And this approach actually has worked out quite well, and very innovative way, I thought.
Nice.
So all innovation, at Innovista, there's quite a range of innovations, right? I mean, this is like social innovation to a certain extent, but they have pretty much everything, ranging from big, enormous failures, like spectacular failures, going up to technological innovation as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, Tata Group, of course, has companies. TCS is part of them. There are large companies and small companies, and there were a range of innovation ideas that were presented. One of the very interesting one more idea that I quickly can talk about is something that TCS presented, and it was a very if Tata Power was a social innovation, what TCS presented was a purely technology innovation. So TCS, in collaboration with NXP, or actually on top of NXP. NXP is one of the largest chipset manufacturer in the world, specifically for providing device-level security mobile phones. So what TCS did was actually ensured that we are able to conduct financial transactions on mobile devices in a way that the security is not only at the software level, but security is at the software and firmware hardware level. So that and this technique eventually is being used by Apple, Samsung. So if you have used Apple Pay, chances are, or not chances are, the guarantee is that you are using NXP chipset. The Apple phones are using NXP chipset, and on top of that, at the firmware level as well as on the software level, is a TCS software, and TCS has filed some 10 or 11 patents for this software that actually guarantees a secure mechanism of conducting or doing Apple Pay. And same is true with Samsung Pay, which are the two leading mobile phone manufacturers. So this was a big innovation story in some sense, to provide security which is at software and hardware level. So you're right, Sumeet. There were a range of innovation ideas, and I would I have heard at least 17 or 18 ideas. So rather than covering all of them, I will not that's not the point here. But essentially, if there are any of those ideas, or if you want to hear more about other ideas, do come and talk to me. They were on the biotech, materials, hardware and software technology, and more on the social innovation side. So all bunch of type of ideas.
So I'll tell you what excites me. There are two things. One which I can rub you about, and one I think which is relevant to ThoughtWorks. One of the ways, of course, you spent 3 days at the Taj Mahal Hotel. and the second one I think, which is more relevant, is it seems like they have a method at Tata Sons, at Tata Group, to this whole innovation process, and I'm wondering if there's inspiration there for us.
Yes, there is. But before I get there, right? I mean, since you mentioned Taj Mahal Hotel, and knowing how ThoughtWorks is doing commercially right now, let me put an asterisk that it was paid for by Tata Group. So my stay there was paid for by Tata Group.
Sameet, well done.
Well played.
So jokes aside, I mean, so Tata Group runs this Innovista every year, and since 2006 they have been doing it, and every year they try to get some of the external people along with Tata Group company folks to really act as judges or jury members when the innovation teams present their ideas, so that we collectively kind of vote. It's a competition. That's how they run it. And I was one of the jury members invited. So that's why they paid for the Taj Mahal Hotel expenses. But pretty interesting. So I should definitely, yeah. I mean, it was a big takeaway. I mean, I have been those of you who know me. I mean, I'm big fan of doing anything, systematizing anything that we can, and I was pretty inspired that Tata Group, $137+ billion group across some X number of companies, 100+ companies, and they were able to systematize the process of innovation across all those companies, and they are doing it year after year. Was amazing. Really, truly an inspiring story.
So Sameet, tell us, so as a jury, what did you have to do in this, and was it hard? Was it straightforward for you to judge one team from the other?
No. I mean, it was. Eventually, it didn't turn out to be, frankly, that hard as I initially thought. But Sumeet knows this, and because Sumeet is helping me and Sudhir, we keep pestering him with everything that bothers us. I got this invite to be a jury member almost 4 months ahead of the actual event, and they told us that there are 5,000+ entries apparently from 120+ Tata Group companies across some 150+ cities and stuff like that. So wherever Tata Group companies are, and the process was that they ran regional Innovista events and they ran it across 27 countries. And those who were the winners of them, they ran it in 9 regions apparently, and then final winners, so to say, from those 9 regions, where they all came together for this final event in Mumbai. And I was asked to be one of the jury members for the final event, and I was pretty kind of I was very worried whether I will be able to measure up to the expectation, because I have absolutely all my life I've always worked in software companies. So whatever little I can understand, I can only understand of software, and these are all very diverse companies. How do I really figure out what a chemical company and what if Tata Chemical comes up with their innovation idea, who am I to say anything about it intelligently? But eventually it worked out okay, because they helped us prepare a little bit. There were 4 categories apparently, or there are 4 categories under which they run this innovation competition. One is implemented innovations, piloted technologies. Implemented innovations are the ideas that you have actually taken and end users are using those ideas or the products, and you are actually figuring, or you have figured out how to make money, and you're already making some money out of that. That's
and both the examples that you took seem to be from this.
Correct. Absolutely. Both of those are all my examples are from there because I was a jury member only for this track. Then there was piloted technologies, which is, as the word says, you have a technology, you have identified it, you have piloted it, so which means you have few users, but you haven't really figured out a commercial way of, so it's not mainstream in your business yet. Third category was dare to try, and very interesting. Lack of time, so I will not give any specific innovation ideas that were presented, but dare to try is the category where people had ambitious goals or ambitious product ideas, and but they failed, and so the way Tata Group verbalizes it is it's an idea that could not achieve its expected results. That's how they call it. So they don't say, I mean, what's a failure and success ultimately? So the presenter was laughing. Either we were wrong in coming up with the success measurements, or the ideas were wrong, and the jury is still out as to which of the two is bad. And the fourth one was design honor. So those were the four categories, and they gave us enough reading material. So I was able to so I was studying, to be very frank, after a very, very long time. I studied 2-3 days before I went to the event as a jury member. Experience.
Nice, cool. And like Sumeet was asking, are there any things you think we could borrow from this?
A bunch of them. I think I can give one or two very quick things. I always believe that so they're very heavy belief that competition is a good way to really kind of motivate people for doing things which are above and beyond their expected duty, and they have been running it in a very consistent, systematic way for so many years. So I do believe and I have been talking about it internally to few people in ThoughtWorks even before this event, so I do believe that that's a good thing. We should think about it. We should really try to run it like a competition. They had few other interesting ideas, and Ravi Arora, he's actually a person who runs this entire event, so to say.
Right.
And he was sharing some of the ideas, and he summed it up well. So I'll use it in his words, and those were some of them were the good takeaways for me. So he was saying, most of the innovation is not a one-person game. It's usually the observation was that every team that won and has won since 2006 in Tata Group has always been at least 3 people, and more than that. Every team consisted of senior folks as well as junior folks. So usually teams which were only of very junior folks from an experience perspective, and only senior folks haven't succeeded in achieving the desired result, as they call it. So that was very, very interesting, that you need diverse teams to really work with each other. Women in the team has always helped. So they have said that almost all the teams that won in the end always had a woman participant. None of these are actually requirements, so to say. So point to remember is that not all the 5,003 entries, they were not expected that every team has 3+ people, every team has senior and junior people in the combination and stuff like that. One of the most important takeaway was how Tata Group CXOs sponsored some of these ideas. And for the final event, that was so it was a 3-day event. Last day was really giving awards and things like that. So it was more of a celebration, not really judging. It was not a competition, was already over the previous night. And on the last day, for out of 120+ group companies, I don't know the exact number, but maybe at least 70-80 companies CEO level people were in that event. So it was a pretty big deal, and I thought that was a big takeaway for me. I mean, most of the ideas, their senior most management team or senior most leadership team was not only interested in those ideas, but were backing those ideas in a very active manner. And I think that's very crucial. Most of the ideas that I was a jury member for, and I had exposure only to dare to try and to implemented innovations category. And all of those ideas, they were more than 12-month ideas. So innovation, even though the idea may seem like a spike, it's usually not a spike. For it to be really an implemented idea where end users and customers are using it. Pretty interesting things. I think lot for ThoughtWorks to borrow from and use. I'm hoping that a couple of the people that I met there will come down to our offices. They are mostly Mumbai, Pune based. So to begin with, maybe in Pune office, but I'm sure we'll try to get them to other places and find an
Yeah, that would be
opportunity.
fantastic if we can hear from someone like Ravi Arora who has been working on this, I guess, in Tata and as well as in other companies. Is that
That's
right?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Cool. Sounds
We
great.
should probably get somebody like Gopi to be at our away day whenever we have the next one.
Yeah, I mean, this whole Tata Innovista, I mean, I didn't mention it, but Tata Innovista is usually sponsored by Group CTO office or Group CTO, and Gopi is a Group CTO, and yeah, totally. I mean, he had some, and he will be good person to challenge us on bunch of things. I mean, he was a couple examples, and then I'll stop. He was saying that, hey, ever since he joined Tata Group, he has asked the entire group to focus heavily on patents, and he believes that if you have innovation ideas, then you should file patents, and you should use those ideas for your commercial advantage. And so some of the ideas will challenge our thinking, which is good. I mean, we don't have to agree with him in everything. I mean, he's a he himself is a very, very hands-on senior techie person. So I think a lot of us will enjoy interacting with him. He has these ideas around patent. He has very strong held beliefs, and one of the things he was telling me, and he has a right combination of socially aware and Tata Group's mission and what technology can do for the companies. So he was giving me an example saying, hey, all over the world, all the automobile companies, for example, are placing a bet on automatic cars, and there are multiple ways to do it. Will the car be a completely self-driving car, which means no human interaction, or will the cars be human assisted, or will they be assisting humans? And there are 2-3 ways to think about this whole automation in the car. And he was saying that working along with Tata Motors and JLR, Jaguar Land Rover, the new acquisition that they have done, they have placed a bet in saying that it will be a human assisted automation. And he was telling me that technically though, and he was saying that his personal belief is that human assisted will win because of psychology and not because of technology. And he believes, he himself as a technologist believes that technology will actually make fully automatic cars far more viable than human assisted. And as the technology progresses, he was saying human assist will be difficult to do technically than fully automatic. And he has, so I think some of those will be interesting conversations if we get him. And totally, I'll try. We should get him. We should try to get him for one of our away days or our equivalent events.
And not all ideas will run counter. I mean, we have a view about software patents. We don't necessarily have a fully thought out view about patents of all kinds. And there are a lot of interesting movements inside the patent sphere. Like there's this notion called patent left, which is like copy left. Then there's this interesting notion about preventive patents, wherein you discover something, you patent it so that no one else can patent it, and then you allow free use of the patented work. So I don't think I mean, there might be a very, very, very strong black and white view we have about software patents. We may not have as much of a strong view about other patents.
Right. And even on the, and as I said, there are too many examples on this topic, but, another example that I saw was something called Sugamya Pustakalaya. So those of you are interested, do Google it out. Sugamya Pustakalaya is a website or is a library that TCS has set up in collaboration with the Government of India. And it's specifically for print challenged people. So what it does is actually it converts all the printed material into Braille and EPUB 3, and there are few formats which are actually for print challenged people. And he was saying that we have so they again there TCS and Gopi's direction being, if you come up with something innovative new, file a patent, and they did file a patent. And they have actually given all of those to government, and in collaboration with government, they have actually put it out saying any publisher can use all of these patents free of charge. So you're right. I mean, are they totally open source? I think they are. I mean, they did not do that, but they were saying any publisher, if they want to use this and make whatever they publish available to print challenged people, they are free to use all of our software, patents, ideas without any money. Sugamya Pustakalaya, of course, is free of charge after doing some sort of registration process with the Government of India, but it's free of charge and stuff like that. So you're right. I think there will always be midpoints where we will even agree on philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. So Sumeet, you were talking about how psychology will eventually decide adoption of the technology in automated cars, and that incidentally is what I wanted Sumeet to talk about. Psychology. Sumeet, you were at what Jive World conference, and you were talking about a psychologist's session that you attended.
Yeah, so his name is really difficult to remember. His name's Dacher Keltner, Dacher is the first name. But I think if you search for psychologist behind the movie Inside Out, you'll find his name along with his colleague. So yeah, that was a very interesting talk. We spoke for about 30 minutes about emotions, which is basically the foundation of the whole story of Inside Out, and how they kind of play in terms of building great teams.
Yeah, it's very interesting that we are talking about the movie Inside Out on Outside In. So with that joke out of my system, tell us more. What did he do on the movie Inside Out, and how is that connected with some of the insights that he was sharing?
Well, so apparently, this fellow had been doing some research, and he's written some 3 books. It's The Power Paradox. He's written a book called Born to Be Good, and another book, the name of which I can't remember. And he's a professor at Berkeley for several years. So he'd been researching human emotions for, I think, the last 2.5, 3 decades. And Pete Docter, who's the director of the movie, Academy Award winning now, came and said, "Hey, I want to make a movie on emotions." And he said, "Great idea. When you're done in 7 years, come back to me." And of course, eventually they ended up making the movie together. And as you know, it's a raging hit. But he was talking about the fact that most teams that work together are basically a potboiler of emotions. And then he was talking about 5 different themes that help us think through that whole power of connection. Now, some of them are a little fluffy. Some of them are obvious. Some of them are quite counterintuitive. One of the things that he was talking about, and I've been mentioning this quite a bit, with colleagues who have small children. So he mentioned it, and I found that interesting, is that human beings are the only species that's actually born premature. So if you think of it, there are very few animals that are born so helpless, and that's basically down to an evolutionary need. Because if human beings had to be pregnant for the duration that it took for a child to walk out, to just be born and then within a couple of hours start walking and seeing the world, then our gestation period probably would have been some 4 years. But 4 years gestation period for a weak human being that wasn't fast, didn't have claws, didn't have big teeth, would mean that they would get predated on very easily. So I think at some point, natural selection took over, and we said, okay, we will give birth to premature babies, and we will prolong our own lives. But what that means is that it takes up to 7 years at a bare minimum, and as a joke, sometimes 50 years for human beings to become independent, and that vulnerability makes it necessary for us to be connected to other people.
Hey, sorry, Sumeet. I'm going to interrupt you for just a second because we are hearing a noise from your end. I think it will go away if you just hold your hold the mic. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Yeah. So that's what he was saying, that we have an inherent vulnerability that makes us want to connect. And then he proceeded to talk about a few things. Some of them are quite appropriate. Some of them are quite inappropriate. Potentially inappropriate, and you need to tread on them with a pinch of salt. Particularly, one of the things he was talking about is tactile touch, for example, is something that's very ingrained in human beings. He was talking about a study that he did in jails, where across bars, people would come and touch another person who was at the other end of the bar. And in most cases, with nothing but a touch and a 1-second delay, the people on the other side of the bar would be able to understand the emotion that was getting conveyed through the touch.
Wow.
Which is fascinating. Of course, there were some exceptions he called out, like, for example, men weren't necessarily always able to comprehend when women touched them with anger. Probably explains why some marriages don't work out. But the other fascinating thing he was talking about is where his class actually did a study of the NBA across one full season, 6 months. And they surveyed every team. And what they noticed is that teams that actually touched well collaborated and performed better, which means, all of those fist pumps that you see, the high fives, the chest thumps, people flying through the air and hugging each other and all that, it seemed like they were more efficient, they passed more, they won more games on average. And there's probably a science to that. But of course, there was a pinch of salt. You talk about all of this touching, which works in a sports context, may not necessarily be the most appropriate in a work context. So that was one of those interesting insights.
Cool. And which were ones that you think we could apply, or we are already at it? I mean, I believe we have a lot of fantastic teams. Yes, there must be one or two things that already intuitively we've been doing, I guess.
So I felt like there were a bunch of things that we have in motion, or we at least think about, which I think could apply in a big way. So one of the things he was talking about is gratitude rooted in respect. One of the things he says, which binds teams together, is the feeling that one person contributed to another, which I felt like was incredibly obvious. Probably didn't need him to tell us, but he felt like it seemed like he was hinting towards this sense of altruism that a lot of us always have. And I felt that our efforts internally to try and recognize each other, some of the stuff that we are trying to do around recognition, even the think tank type of initiative that we were doing, that can build some great bonds inside teams, outside teams, inside our own community. He was, in fact, referring to it as one of the greatest currencies in social lives.
Wow.
The other thing which he was talking about, and I think this might be pertinent to the longevity of a community, or a team. So he was talking about invoking epiphany and awe, and what effect it has. So what he was saying is that oftentimes teams become dysfunctional because people feel very psychologically entitled, very focused on, let's say, money, and there is this sense of self-importance that takes over that makes teams dysfunctional. But the more you encounter epiphany and awe, and he defined awe as the feeling of wonder about something vast that you don't immediately understand. And he says the more you encounter that, the less psychologically entitled you feel, the less important you feel, the less likely you are to take money, for example, and the more reflective you become. One example he gave is, just being out there in nature, in the space of something so vast that it overpowers you. But I was actually trying to relate it back to the feeling I had when somebody like Bezwada Wilson came in to, the ThoughtWorks Away Day, wherein, uh, the task that he's undertaken, the mission that he's on, is so huge. The battle that he's fighting is so big that I can feel nothing but awe. And then there's also that sense of epiphany because, well, to a great extent, it isn't something that many of us think about. It's, we think about Swachh Bharat and we think lots of toilets. We don't necessarily think about who's got to pay the price of that. And the moment you encounter that, then your own self-entitlement, your sense of importance goes down. And it makes you feel like, oh, now it at least made me feel that, well, at least I have a platform of people that I can work with to somehow support a cause like Wilson's. And I think it cuts in many ways. I mean, can we find, let's say, a technical problem that challenges us so much that we feel that sense of epiphany and awe?
Yeah, sometimes you get that by working with somebody on the client side who's just terrific at what they've been doing. Like in TMT, Unmesh and Mushtaq keep talking about this architect who has been building telescopes for 30, 40 years now.
Yeah.
Or something. So he knows everything there is to know about telescopy software.
And look, TMT is a great example, right? No one person has all of the skills to be able to bring that project to fruition. It's just huge. It's vast, and you can't immediately understand it. And in that, there is that sense of awe, and it brings about that lack of self-importance, that lack of psychological entitlement, and that tendency to lean on each other to be able to create that cohesive unit.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you feel to be part of something bigger, I think all those successful teams, I mean, I remember, and it doesn't have to be always, as big a mission, even a commercial project, right? I mean, I remember how a neat team, that was a project done in Pune, how they were able to always speak very intelligently about what the product was all about. So I think, you feel part of and you understand and the great story, and then you're able to, so all the successful teams, you're right, are able to feel to be part of what they're creating is much bigger than their individual ambitions.
Right. I have this tendency to link unrelated pieces of work. So as I was listening to him and he was talking about epiphany and awe, I was connecting it back to what Dan Pink talks about in terms of purpose. And he feels that when you're connected to something bigger than yourself, which you can't actually achieve by yourself, and you know about a certain common direction, then you're more likely to be motivated to reach it. And I mean, personally, it reminded me of, that's how I feel about ThoughtWorks' 3-pillar mission. It's something that's bigger than me, something that I'm part of, and I kind of understand the purpose of this collective, and that's what motivates me to be part of this collective. In fact, there was another thing which linked me to an unrelated piece of work. So he was talking about stress.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, yeah, well, working in incredibly stressful environments. There are failures that happen. There are things that blow up in our face, and we have issues of stress. One strategy that he talked about when it came to stress, which I found odd, but it made sense, is he talked about this notion of remembrance through narrative. And he said, well, we're a storytelling species. We are generally good at storytelling. But what he mentioned about stressful events, and all teams have stressful events, is that if you take the time to write or narrate the strongest emotions, the facts of the event, the richer the story you tell, the lower your stress gets. And the more you do this collectively, the lower your stress gets. And I felt, wow, that's an interesting insight. If there is actually research to say that, then there is a dual purpose to that whole idea of storytelling. One is that, of course, you learn from the experience by storytelling, and somebody else can figure out how not to get into the same pickle as you got into. But well, if it helps lower the stress of the team, then wonderful. The other thing which he was talking about is just now, of course, he mentioned it in very mushy language, and he called it loving kindness. And he was talking about, doing things for people in your team, doing things for others, which and without necessarily expecting anything in return. It could be putting in the extra hour so somebody can go home early, etc. But that actually made me think about this gentleman called Nipun Sharma. Do you remember him, Chirag?
No, it doesn't ring a bell. But
So
that's me. I'm terrible with names.
Right. So he'd come into the Pune office. We'd actually called him in for a banyan tree.
Oh yeah. Now I remember. Yeah. They did the thank you cards thing.
Yeah. So did you meet him when he was here, Sameer?
No, I didn't.
Okay, very interesting chap. So he actually founded a company called Service Space. And they have a very interesting model. The model is to pay it forward. So anyone comes to them with some work, and mostly they do work in the social sector. They do the work. They don't actually have a fee associated with the work. So let's say somebody says, "Oh, we want a website developed." They'll say, "Okay, we'll develop the website," and the bill is effectively is $0, 0 cents, and the company, the organization can choose to pay, or they can choose not to pay. But the work is a gift to them. Somehow they seem to sustain themselves. So this guy also runs something called Karma Kitchen, which is based on this whole pay it forward model. So you go to Karma Kitchen, you have a meal, and at the end you get a bill that reads $0, 0 cents. But there's a note out there that says this meal was a gift from someone who came before you. And you can give a gift to the next person who comes after you, if you so desire. And in general, people pay far more than what the cost of the meal actually is, which is interesting, and which seems to sustain that kind of a notion. Seems to sustain both Service Space and Karma Kitchen. So it led me to think about him.
Yeah, sorry. So that they have something similar in Ahmedabad called Seva Cafe.
Seva Cafe.
It's part of the same group. And one of the things that I found really remarkable when I went there was not just the food was fantastic and the service was fantastic, and I experienced this model that you're talking about where there was no bill. And I had sort of, I got to pay what I wanted to pay. But there was a donation box right at the entrance. And a typical sort of payty type of thing with a slot to put in your money. But that box was unlocked. And the instructions read that this is a donation box which is unlocked, which means that if you want, you can add money. If you want, you can take out money.
Yeah.
And it was so fantastic when he was telling about stories of people and their interactions with that box. And
yeah, there is a Seva Cafe that happens periodically in Pune as well. Except unlike Karma Kitchen, it doesn't have a fixed space, so it travels. So I don't remember. I don't know if you remember this story, Chirag. He was talking about, and I'll conclude here. This guy called Julio Diaz, just regular New Yorker apparently. So one night, on a very cold night, he gets out the metro, gets off the train and gets out of the station. And there's this young teenager who holds a knife against him and says, "Hey, I'd like all of your money." And very quietly, this fellow, Julio, he takes out his wallet and gives it to the kid. And the kid is just setting off to run out. And this guy stops him saying, "Hey, it's cold out there. Don't you want my jacket?" And the kid is like totally flabbergasted because he didn't learn this in Robbery 101. So it's like, okay, cool. So he comes back 2 steps and takes the jacket. And the next thing Julio says is, "So I was heading to dinner. Do you want to join me?" And the kid is even more confused. It's like, "Oh, Robbery 101 didn't teach me this as well. Okay, let's see how this goes." And so they go for dinner and they have this long conversation, fairly good conversation. And at the end of the dinner, he says, "Well, I was about to pay for this dinner, but you have my wallet." And just without asking, the kid actually takes out the wallet and gives it to him. And he says, "Okay, just as before we leave, I have one request. Can I also have your knife?" And without any coercion, apparently, at the end of that evening, the kid just gave him his knife. So it seems like there is some value and some power in unhinged kindness, unhinged acts of giving. His thing of loving kindness kind of reminded me of that.
And you were saying that that's one of the factors in making a great team as well. People feeling emotion for each other.
Yeah, he was actually referring to it as doing without the act of without expecting anything in return. The more you can do it just randomly because of that spirit of being in a team, the more it builds, a community or a team itself.
Nice.
A lot of fluffy stuff, not something that you can kind of put into science immediately. He did have a lot of graphs and charts, which I wish I could present and say, okay, here's the science to the whole thing. But yeah,
you were saying he's written a book as well, right? Does his book cover some of the same ground?
I haven't actually read it. It's on my list to read. He's written 3 books. I remember 2 names. One is, I have one of them, Born to Be Good. The other one is called Power Paradox. The third one is something about compassion, but I actually don't remember the name.
Cool. All right. That's about time we have to cover in this episode. Thank you, Sumeet. Thank you, Sumeet, for taking the time. This is fantastic. Like always, I got to know a bunch of things, a bunch of new things, and a bunch of books that I might go and dip into.
Thanks, Chirag.
Thank you, Chirag.
All right.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.
See ya.
Stay tuned.
Bye.
Bye.